And now, two guys who survived a ninja attack, Aaron and Jonathan.
Howdy, and welcome to episode 22 of In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. We're your hosts, Aaron
and Jonathan.
In today's episode, we become Mr. Rogers. Won't you be our neighbor? You are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. I'm telling you, Ron Paul does fit in that tube. He's in there right now.
Ron Paul would not fit in that tube.
I'm telling you, man. Ron Paul is in that tube. Let him out.
He's far taller than that.
For those of you who have no idea what we're talking about, we're joking amongst ourselves. We have a Ron Paul poster in a poster tube. And, well, it's been a very long weekend of Appleseed shooting and heat delirium. And so at this point, we're slap happy. So today's episode, moving past our insanity, is going to be about, well, how do you get somebody else interested in prep? And this is a question that kind of, I know we've both had issues with it, and I know a lot of people that's a big thing. It's, well, I'm in this and I believe in it and I'm really concerned about things, and how do I get people that are not awake yet or not as concerned as I am into prepper community, the prepper lifestyle,
without sounding like an absolute nut,
like the way we started this show.
Exactly.
The simplest and easiest thing to do is to first lead by example, and by lead by example, do the things we've all been talking about doing, which is store food, be part of your community, be a positive force in your community, in your own life, focusing on your health, wealth, your intelligence. If you're just tuning into the show for the first time, you'll need to refer back to our Survival Chi show. Don't worry, you won't need to shave your head, as some members of our audience have claimed to have done in the name of Survival Chi. But
I just wear the robes.
Well, yeah, they're awfully comfy.
And they create a breeze.
Yes, yes, and in this heat, that is nice. So, focus. I'll edit that out later, maybe.
Okay. Yeah.
So lead by example. Focus on those things that we've talked about. Leading by example, being the best person you can be, being the best positive force that you can be in your life.
And in your community.
And for your direct social circles, for your friends, for your family, for everyone whose life touches your life. Well, the next thing you can do is not be an alarmist. Well, by being an alarmist, and there's, and even Jonathan and I have things, even though we stay away from on the show, we have our own tinfoil hat things that we like to talk amongst ourselves privately about. And the reason we don't put them on the show is because they're not important and they're not relevant to the conversation of survival.
We really don't speak about them outside of very limited circles.
Yeah.
Some of the things we talk about are a little way out there. That's not to say we believe 100% everything we say.
Often it's just in jest.
It's just in jest, or it's just a theory as to why things could be the way they are.
Yes.
Things like that.
And by being an alarmist, it's, that person in the survival community. I'm being general here. I'm not talking about any one particular individual, that you just feel like they're just any minute they're going to grab you by the shoulders and shake you and be like, don't you get it? Don't you understand?
Right. And it basically kind of goes to that whole idea of, in addition to preparing for the most likely things, don't overblow the most likely things either. Be prepared. I guess it goes back to the old saying of prepare for the worst and hope for the best. It's that hoping for the best part that you have to kind of portray. And Aaron said it a lot. The question you kind of have to ask yourself on a regular basis as you do things is, whether things go wrong or not, does what I'm doing make my life better? And that's a good way of leading by example. You can utilize that to lead by example.
Exactly. Focus on the things that make your life better today while while times are good. We're going to presume that times are good for you in today. Or whether things go good or bad. It doesn't matter. If you're storing food, we've talked about before how that has positive effects on your life in the here and now, whether anything goes wrong or not. It's you can buy as a matter of convenience as opposed to having to buy at the price at the grocery store that they're asking you to buy at that day. You can stave off food inflation to varying degrees by practicing these methods. There's a lot of things that go on, and it's food is one of the easiest examples, but there's a lot of things like that. Take for example the self-sufficiency experiment that I'm doing with the rabbits and the chickens. Well, I was talking to a mutual friend recently, and he was like, "Yeah, it all sounds interesting, but God, it just sounds so much work." And we started talking, and I was like, "Well, what kind of hobbies do you have? What are you doing these days?" I hadn't really talked to this person in a while, and he was telling me, and I was like, "That sounds like a lot of work." And he's like, "Oh, but I love it." And I was like, "Exactly. I love dealing with the livestock. I love chasing the chickens around every evening to get them into the coop, and I like." When I'm having a really bad day at the office or something's just really irritating me, I can take a break and I can go out and I can pet the bunnies. Nice, soft little bunnies.
Tasty.
Yes, eventually. But and so he got it, and it was like, look, this has a positive impact on my life right now. While to one person it may seem like a lot of work, and that was the only argument he had against what I was doing. To me, it's not, because it's if you enjoy anything you do, then it doesn't matter how much work you have to put into it usually, and it does create a positive impact on your life. And then the idea is that out of this, should things go horribly wrong, presumably in that amount of time, I would have not only built up the skill set of how to raise, breed, care for livestock, but I would also have that infrastructure in place of being able to carve out that part of my nutritional needs that at least to some extent I was independent in that way.
And I think the reason to bring up specifically the livestock is that's probably the most extreme
Yeah.
that anyone's going to have to ever explain within the survival community or the prepper community.
Unless you're getting into a bunker or something.
Right. And I think even then, though, you could easily do that as, another piece of land, a
And
getaway home.
that brings me to another interesting point, and I'm glad you brought that up. I was speaking to somebody recently that really kind of started waking up, and we were talking. They were really, and it was funny to me in that they were where I was years ago. That initial panic of, oh my God, there's so much to do, and they were talking about they had at these two diamonds that were worth basically about $500,000. And they were like, well, I could sell those, and I could buy this piece of land, and I'm not doing anything with those stones, and this and that, and I had to stop him for a minute, and I was like, but now you're only focused on buying that piece of land, that bug out location, purely from I'm going to have it if things go wrong. You're looking at it all the wrong way, and I'm going to suggest that you not do anything like that until you've come to a different perspective. And they kind of looked at me for a second, and I was like, well, the perspective is I used to want a house in St. Kitts like Neil Strauss, or some really far off ranch or something as a bug out location. And now the way I look at it is I don't really want one for that reason. What I want is a place that I can go to for vacations, or on a regular basis on weekends with family and with friends, and go camping or go fishing or go hunting or just go fart around in the woods.
I think that actually brings up a good way of addressing this with people. Doesn't matter whether you're talking to somebody who has decided to get into prepping, is there already, or has no idea why you're doing what you're doing. If you look at things in relation to facts, logic, and actually knowing what you're talking about, you're never going to come across as a nut, or, people aren't going to look at you as the next Ted Kaczynski.
Yeah.
They're going to see you as a knowledgeable resource in something. It's going to appear to them this is something you're interested in. I'm not saying don't be passionate about it. You should be passionate about it. It should be like anything you do. I think everything people do, they should have some passion that they put into. Otherwise, well,
what's the point?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, at that point, it doesn't matter why. I mean, why would you be prepping anyway? Because who cares? There's a difference between, I look at survival as being able to live and live well. Other people look at survival as a base level of sustenance and being able to just be there. To me, that's not what it is. So if I can't be passionate about something and passionate about living, then I don't see the point in doing all of this. But if you have that passion, but behind it you have logic and facts and reason, you're always going to come across as someone who's a trusted resource versus a nut.
And even if they do initially look at you like John was joking a second ago, like Ted Kaczynski, if you have logic, facts, and you have reason and knowledge behind what you're saying, and what you're saying is perfectly reasonable, like what we were talking a minute ago, like focusing on the things that make your life better in the here and now, whether things go wrong or not, and then they're there for you if things go horribly wrong. It's a logical step. And I was having a conversation with somebody recently, and they were asking me, I had just met this person, and it was in a social setting, and they were like, well, and I just kind of threw it out there just for shock and just for fun. I was like, oh, well, I'm a survivalist. And the initial reaction was first for them to look at me crazy, and they're like, well, you look like a regular run-of-the-mill yuppie. And then we went on and started talking, and I was like, well, it's really not, for me, it's not about running off to the woods and growing a long beard. Not if that's what your thing is, I don't have anything against it, but for me, that's not what it's about. It's about making sure that no matter what happens, I have a base level of happiness and enjoyment in living, and that my close friends and my family are protected. And we went on to talk a little bit about it beyond that, and I pointed out different things can go wrong any moment, and just like you have home insurance, you have car insurance, you insure your life in many ways against disasters. Now, you don't expect them to happen, but you acknowledge that they probably happen. And that's all survival and prepping is insurance against darker times.
Going back to, you always want to prepare for the worst and hope for the best.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so, I mean, like Aaron said earlier, it is actually so easy to justify everything you're doing. Not that you have to. I'm just saying, even to yourself, all the things that you're prepping for and saving for and doing makes perfect sense. You could lose a job. Or, more simply, I mean, and this is more detail than everybody needs, but I was joking about losing fluids earlier. I needed some Imodium today. I will tell you, I know exactly where everything in my medical kit is. It is very simple, and it's always stocked. I keep a very careful tab on what I've got in it, what the expiration dates are on everything. Well, part of that is part of the whole general prep thing. I mean, if I get a cold, I know where to find something. If I get the flu, I know where to find something. Get a stomach virus, same thing. I know where to find everything.
And you don't
in that
have
kit.
to run out to the store and get it. You're not inconvenienced, or somebody else is an inconvenience to tend to the issue.
Exactly. I do not have to put myself or my wife at some inconvenience to run to, convenience store or pharmacy of choice.
In the middle of the night.
In the middle of the night, because I know where all that stuff is. Now, obviously, if I need a prescription for something or something that is way outside the bounds of what you would have in a medical kit, then yeah, you might still have to do that. But you know that you're covered for 90% of all the situations that might happen. Or maybe even more. I mean, you may have a bigger medical kit than I do. You may have a smaller one. But let's say it's even 80%. You know you're covered. If you lose your job, you know that you're covered. You have a medical kit. It's been paid for already. That stuff's not cheap. I mean, if you look at how expensive all that stuff is, it's not cheap, and most of it lasts at least a year. So it's a insurance, just like the food storage. This is an insurance also. Nobody's ever gonna, I've never heard someone question somebody buying a really good first aid kit.
Yeah, I know.
It's amazing. Yet people look at you funny when you tell them that you've got 2 months worth of food in the house, which I think is silly. It's just another insurance policy that you're taking out. Just like everything, the courses you take are an insurance policy. The food you store, the medicine you store, the skills and talents you learn, all insurance policies.
And a large part of this is just putting it into perspective for people. Because their reaction is really that what you're talking about is out of the norm. And I know some people have issues with the word the norm, but the norm really is just the average. And what we're talking about now, while a lot of people are starting to wake up these days, it's still not the average, so it's not the norm. But there was a time when all of this was the norm because society didn't run so efficiently. Your grandparents had to can vegetables and can meats and prepare for harsh times, and they did go through the Great Depression and did experience hard times. So for them, this was a no-brainer. But we've lost touch with that concept because we've had such prosperity for so long.
And such advancements in technology. I mean,
Yeah.
real-time inventories are fantastic. I mean, from a store productivity perspective and a cash outflow perspective, the concept of a real-time inventory is wonderful. It's even great for you as a consumer on a day-to-day basis. You get what you need when you need it. Fantastic. That doesn't mean you can't store. So just because that's happened on the commercial side doesn't mean in your personal life you have to completely behave that way. Something, Aaron says a lot, and I tend to agree with this whole idea of baiting the hook and bringing people into this slowly. I like that idea, and one of the reasons that I think hurricane season is really an easy time to bring people into the fold, at least here in the South. And, in the North, it might be blizzard season or the deep, hard winters that you guys have. In California, well, it's probably just all the time, but maybe it's the earthquake concept that brings people into the fold. But the idea is that with the hurricane season idea, I can very quickly say, yeah, I store water, I've got food, a first aid kit. People say, well, why are you doing that? I can bring up the prep idea, but then I can also say, well, don't you have that in your hurricane kit? And then very quickly, you'll be amazed at how quickly people actually get defensive. Oh, of course I have a hurricane kit.
And it's about relating it back to something practical that they already know and understand, just like we talked a minute ago about that, when you talk to somebody, well, you have home insurance, you have car insurance, you probably have a fire extinguisher in your kitchen and have never had a fire in your kitchen in your entire life. But it can happen, and so you prepare for it. And so those things are the norm, and so people are used to those, so they don't usually react to that. Well, of course you've got a fire extinguisher in your kitchen, but now if they walk into your bedroom and you've got a fire extinguisher in your bedroom, well, that's out of the norm because most people don't think about what a good idea it would be to have a fire extinguisher in a part of the home that you spend the majority of your time. So it's you have to relate things in logical, fact-based ways that other people can relate to. You cannot start off, and this is going back to you can't be an alarmist, you can't start off with whatever way you might think society could end tomorrow. Because the second you throw that at somebody, that if we use the phrase a lot, asleep, if they're asleep to the concept of prepping and to survival, and you try to throw something at them that heavy, man, they're going to shut down immediately. A wall's going to come up and it's, wow, this guy's crazy. And they say that, and it's the easiest way to immediately shut down the discussion in their head that they don't have to deal with what you've just thrown at them, because here they are in their nice, happy little bubble, and yeah, the economy's a little shaky right now, and maybe people are having a hard time with jobs, but overall, things just aren't honestly that bad. And then you throw something Hollywood-style insane at them, not necessarily insane, but something Hollywood-style dramatic at them, They can't take that all in all at once and process that. So it's a slow bait. It's a, well, we do things to, and yeah, we prep in case something goes wrong, but we have this food, and we've had all these benefits from it, and that we're saving money, and we're
Right.
able to do capital deferment.
Going back to what you were saying about the overwhelming thing, though, I think that's a really true statement in the sense that if you go to an extreme, whatever the extreme in your head is, and bear in mind, it's different for a lot of people. Like whatever I think that potential catastrophic event might be is maybe very different than what you think it might be. But if you go straight to that, the first thing most people are going to hear is zombie apocalypse. And I don't mean that that's what you're saying. I mean that's what
That's
they're
what I'm
hearing.
saying, Jonathan.
Well, I know that's what you're saying. You go around preaching it almost.
I
mean,
do. They're coming.
on a
They're
daily
coming.
basis.
They're coming.
It's aliens. He's all wrong. Once we know the aliens are coming, it's okay.
That is why we spent that day in Roswell
Exactly.
and survived.
We did survive.
Yes.
I was looking for those guys. I didn't see them anywhere.
They weren't there, which
They
is
were
why
hiding.
we then went to that. We moved on to Riadosa, but
Riadosa.
they weren't
There-
there either.
I'm not sure. That one girl.
Well, all right, that's a different. We'll back on track.
All right. No, but that's. I think when you go to these extremes, because you've been thinking about it, and you've already had the opportunity, and I'm going to say this in the lightest way I possibly can. You have had the opportunity to be scared, all right, and you've already done. Most of you have either listened to us and heard about the kinds of extreme things we did at the beginning. We went out and bought everything. We prepared for some things that now I consider to be a little bit ridiculous. And I'm sure some of you have already been through that too. But most of the people you'd be talking about talking about this topic talking about this topic for the first time with, are not going to already have prepared in that way. So in their heads, they're going to hear this extreme thing from you, look at you like you're nuts, and hear, oh, all this guy thinks is coming, or zombie apocalypse, World War Z, and we're all going to be shooting zombies in the head. And that's not what you're talking about at all. I mean, most of you have been listening to this show now for 22 episodes. You've heard what we've said. You probably, to some extent, maybe agree with us, maybe you don't. But you prepare for the most obvious things, and like we've said before, that's going to be things like job loss. Unemployment in this country right now is sitting somewhere between, and this is the number that we're told, it's probably much higher in reality, but it's somewhere between 9 and 10%, depending on which number you believe from which economist, which means real unemployment might be as high as 16 even, possibly even higher. But let's just say between 9 and 10%. That means if you've got 20 friends, there's a good chance 2 of them are unemployed and looking for jobs. So that's a very real thing to say, hey, if you did all this stuff and you prepared, if you lose your job, you have 3 months of time of food that's paid for. That's savings. It's essentially savings. It's money in the bank. In this case, it's food in the bank. It's your own personal food bank that you can draw from for some period of time. Hopefully, you only need to draw from it for 30 of the 90 days. But you can if you need to, if that emergency arises. Now, we also recommend actual dollar savings and things like that. But you've got this emergency backup that now becomes very relatable to a lot of people.
And that's 30 days that you do not have to worry about, how do I feed myself? How do I feed my spouse? How do I feed my kids? It's taken care of. That's one less thing you have to worry about. So that's really what we mean by make it a logical argument and make it slow, easy, bait the hook, reel them in. You can't throw things at people. If you believed your entire life the world was flat, and I came to you tomorrow and told you, no, it is in fact a sphere, this wonderful sphere, but your whole life you had known it to be flat, and you had always been taught it was flat, you would think I was insane, unless I could then say it and then back it up with facts and real information to come behind it, and not, I heard it from this guy that screams on the corner of the street that the world was in back a sphere.
That's actually a really great segue into a good way of talking about this, which is don't preach. Turn it into a discussion. When you go into a discussion with knowledge and facts, you're actually asking the other person to participate. You're bringing them into it. And when you turn it into a discussion, they're going to start asking you questions. When you start preaching, they're not going to ask you questions, but if they're in their head, they're going to look at you like, oh, yeah, just another one of these guys who thinks the sky is falling. But if you turn it into a real conversation and like I keep saying, discussion, you're going to draw them into that discussion. You're going to talk about real possibilities. You're going to talk about things that are happening to people they know. I mean, this is not unusual. And again, the benefits here are that when your friends are prepared and your family is prepared and you're prepared, first of all, it gives you less to worry about. Second of all, you want these other people prepared because it helps the community as a whole when people can take care of themselves. They don't have to go rely on you or someone else. So you want to draw these people into a dialogue so that they can then have that same type of a dialogue with somebody else. It's amazing how viral these kinds of conversations can become. And you don't want it to be an alarmist conversation because that's the last thing you want to actually go viral. What you want is a calm, intelligent conversation to occur that is then going to be another calm, intelligent conversation down the road versus an alarmist conversation because, quite honestly, that doesn't help anybody.
Yeah. And another part about preaching, it's just like, it's very much like the alarmist. If somebody walks up to you and starts preaching, they're kind of like that random person that comes up to you when you're out in a public place and out of the blue just randomly starts talking to you, and you look at the person and they're not necessarily somebody you want to have a conversation with. Probably more women in the audience can identify with this than men, but I know even Jonathan and I were having some drinks with some friends a couple months back, and a random guy had had too much to drink, and he was, there was nothing wrong with him. He was a friendly, nice enough guy, but here we were as a group of friends having a conversation, and all of a sudden this random guy walks up and just starts talking to us. What do you think was the first thing to go through each and every single one of our heads? Who is this guy? What does he want? And dear God, when is he going to go away?
And we haven't had Ken on the show yet, but when we do, you'll understand this comment more. Ken's first thought was, where's my gun?
But by preaching to people, you're evoking that same reaction. It's different when you're going to a church or synagogue or mosque or whatever place of worship. You're going there to be preached to. But when you're speaking to friends or when you're out in any kind of social settings, interacting with other people, well, the last thing you want is to be preached to. So somebody walks up to you and starts spouting off things to you, all these new ideas, all these heavy ideas. Oh my God, there's so much stuff, and I'm worried about paying my bills, and I'm worried about the car that my 16-year-old just banged up or whatever. You're not in a position to listen to that at that same moment. And so if you try to preach to people about survival and preparedness, you're doing the same thing. You're basically immediately giving them excuse to throw up a wall, shut you out, and go, this person's bananas. I don't have to listen to him. I'm going back to my business about thinking about how my dog lied to me the other day about, yes, he did in fact steal the chicken off the counter, or whatever it was that is on your mind in the moment.
So just to summarize a little bit of what we talked about, and wrap it up into a few key points. Use the soft sell technique. Bait the hook, reel them in slowly. Don't preach. Don't demand anything. Don't be an alarmist. Argue with facts, logic, and knowledge, and actually don't even argue. Discuss. Bring them into the conversation. If you wrap them up in the conversation, things will go much better. And always remember to ask them, turn the question around on them, and ask them, would this make your life better or worse? And the answer is usually going to be better. By preparing, you're never going to hear, oh, it'll make my life worse. So that's just a simple way to kind of think of things. Good wrap up for everything.
And always lead by example.
Yep.
Probably one of the most important things of what we've discussed today, and we've mentioned that before in previous, because it's something we feel strongly about, which is to lead by example. Whatever it is you think is important and whatever it is that you think people should know, be the person that is doing that. And that in and itself is a soft sell. People will see you doing it, and people will ask you about it. The moment somebody asks you about what you're doing or whatever it is you have an interest in, they are asking you to sell them on the idea.
And that's what responsible community members do. Lead by example. So now you might be saying to yourself, all right, I've done all these things. And the response I get back is, that all sounds fantastic. I'm thrilled you're doing that. So I'm just going to come to your house. What do you do then?
Well, there's a lot of responses you can have to that. Mine personal is just kind of a quick way to shut it down, which is, or you could just prepare for yourself.
I just tell them I'm well armed.
Sometimes I do that too. Depends on the individual I'm talking to.
Okay, true.
It depends on how well I know the person, and by that I mean I usually know the person very well, and they know I'm half kidding with them. There's also the, why would you come to my door? Well, because we're friends. Well, my response to that is, well, my friends wouldn't ask me or my family to go without because they themselves did not prepare and were not responsible. In that kind of short statement, you've just thrown everything back on them and, for lack of a better word, made them a huge ass. Because you really are putting it into the most simple perspective for them, which is, I've gone through all this trouble. I've done all this stuff. I've taken responsibility for my needs, my family's needs, and my immediate circle's needs. And now you've come in and you've asked me to make a choice between you and those people that I love and care about the most. And I don't know anybody who could really argue beyond that point. I mean, that's almost impossible, because it's like, well, how, if you were saying that to me, I don't know how I could possibly respond to, well, yeah, I think you should feed me some, even if I'm a friend. How can I ask you to feed me over feeding your children?
Right.
Or feeding your spouse, or feeding your parents, or feeding your siblings.
And I think, that's a really good way to look at it. The only other time that I would say that there's another way to look at it is, and I'm actually coming at it from a completely different angle now, so I'm not saying that you would want to necessarily prepare for everyone in your neighborhood. There are people in your lives that you're going to want to be prepared for that are not necessarily going to prepare for themselves. I mean, you may have parents who just, aren't going to do it, in which case, you take that responsibility or don't. That's up to you. But I know for myself, there's certain extra things I keep, knowing that there's some people I will need to be there for. Outside of those people, though, the answer could also very simply be, okay, this is approximately how much I spend a month preparing. You are welcome to give me that money, and I will do it for you. That's an option for you, if that's what you choose to do. Now, I'm not saying that's the right thing to do. I think there's a benefit to communal preparation also. It's something we haven't delved into that much, but I was recently reading some really good information about the concept. It is a way to pool resources and actually do more because you have more resources. So there's always the ability to, your purchasing power goes up.
And it does present some sticky situations,
yes,
and some very clear lines of communications,
right,
and some very specific understandings that have to be brought up first.
At that point, you have to be very clear about what the communal part is versus people's individual responsibilities. And you have to very clearly delegate how all of it works. So that's a whole separate topic that we can talk about another time.
Yeah.
But there is a role for that as well. And you could always say to this person, "Hey, I'd be more than happy to get you your food. This is how much it's going to cost. This is what it's going to look like. I don't recommend that, but that's always an option.
It is, and it's. I've had that come into play in my life a little bit. I've had family members that have said, "Well, just take care of it for me." And for family members, I've been willing to do that.
Right.
And like Jonathan just said, that is a whole topic that we can get into later date as far as that communal preparing concept. But doing for other people, well, if you feel strongly enough about that person and you know that they're just not going to do it for themselves, and then you know that if something really did go wrong, you couldn't say no, or couldn't,
Right.
you would have a very difficult time living with that of saying no, then the option is to do it for them. We know we're a little low energy, and maybe you don't feel like you got your money's worth out of us today. But I think John's a little under the weather, and I've been standing in 103 degrees Texas sun for 2 days, 9 hours a day. We've talked about in a previous episode about being gray and kind of toning things down a little bit. And what we're saying now seems almost counter to that, but it's really not, because it's still gray. It's a soft sell. We want survival to be viral. We want each and every one of you to spread it. And in the same way that Jonathan and I have sat down, and we sit down every week and record a show and put together information and try to spread it out further. Even though there were already survival shows out there, we've tried to come up with one that's different, that's more centered for people that weren't being catered to in an urban environment, and maybe people that didn't want to be preached to or didn't want to constantly hear about what apocalyptic thing, and maybe they really wanted to hear the more philosophical ends, the more practical things, and the more, how do I make this happen for me every day, and how do I sell this to every people, which is what this show is today. And so make it happen. Spread it, and a little self-promotion here. Spread the show too.
Because a prepared community is a safe community.
Yes, and that is one of the best things you can do to prepare is to have people around you prepared. If you have an entire community of people that are prepared, you're a lot less likely to see riots and looting and starving, and well, you're not going to have that person knocking on your door saying, "Hey, feed me too." On a final note, I have been getting a lot of emails from when I talked about sea rations, and there's a tremendous amount of confusion over this. I'm sorry to everyone. We still haven't figured out 100%. I'm just going to go ahead and say that I had a gaffe. Traditional sea rations were kind of like MREs, but more disgusting, and they were from like the 1950s and 1960s. If you're out looking for those, stop. Anything that you find labeled sea rations is not what I was talking about. What I was talking about were the Mainstay and the Daytrax emergency bars that were very similar to one of the 4 original types of sea rations. They're almost like a biscuit. I hope that clears it up for anybody that's potentially been looking for and trying to figure out what I was talking about. We will, of course, put a link in the show notes today to the Mainstay and Daytrax emergency bars, and I will have a review coming out soon of the Daytrax bars. I've not tried out the Mainstay bars. I've been trying out the Daytrax, and as a matter of fact, for the last 2 days, I've been living off the Daytrax emergency bars. Look for a review soon. They're actually not that bad. And with that, we wrap up episode 22. Thank you for joining us today. If you liked the podcast, make sure to leave us a review in iTunes. It helps others find us, and it lets us know how we're doing. If you didn't, well, please feel free to use the feedback form on the site and tell us what you didn't like about it. Seriously, this show is for you, the listener, and if we can improve, we want to know how. Be sure to connect with us through Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube through the links on the top right-hand side of the site at www.intherabbithole.com. Don't forget to sign up for the newsletter on the newsletter page of the site. By connecting with us, you receive updates about the site and notifications of new articles and podcast episodes. That's right, we're not just a podcast. Every week, articles are posted to our site, intherabbithole.com, that cover all manner of topics relating to surviving in an urban environment, whether in good times or in extreme circumstances. Show notes are posted with each and every episode where we invite you, the listener, to comment on the show, interact with us, and each other. Till next time, stay safe and sound.